reasonable people, and welcome to the final session of Skeptical 2024. We're going to have some fun now. It's the end of the conference. I wanted to do something light, something easy. So I asked some of the best skeptics that I know in the world, some of my favorite skeptics, to do something fun. A few minutes of just a rant or something they're passionate about, something under 10 minutes, and some of them can actually do that, and some of them can't, you'll see. Some of them are very brief, some of them are less brief. Some of them had a lot of fun, some of them had less fun, they're a lot more serious. We're going to see 9 of these, and if you don't like one, wait 5 minutes, you're going to get another one. They're all very different, should be a ton of fun. So let's get things going. First off, I would highly encourage you to get a tasty adult beverage while we go through these. I'm not saying it's going to make them better, but it probably won't make them worse. We're going to kick it off with Ben Radford, where you probably really need a little tasty alcoholic beverage. So I first met Ben Radford when I was giving a stranger a ride to a Sylvia Browne protest in Las Vegas. And I turned to him and I said, "What's your name again?" And he said, Ben. And I said, "Radford? Like the author?" And he said, "Yeah, that's me." And it's like, wow. Okay. Ben has written a ton of books, mostly about bad clowns, but also about other things. Fantastic skeptic. Editor of the Skeptical Inquirer magazine. Enjoy his rant.
Okay, so Jay Diamond wants a short rant. Well, Jay Diamond, if that's really your name, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Ben Radford of Skeptical Inquirer Science magazine. I've got a couple master's degrees. I've written a dozen books. I don't do rants. I don't know if you know this about me. I'm a serious, level-headed researcher. I dot I's, I cross my T's. I'm about scholarship and diplomacy and trying to keep people on the rail. So I'm the antithesis of rants. I don't like them. They go off the rails. They say crazy things. So I don't do that. I am the epitome of erudition. I don't know if you know that. In fact, you got some stones asking me to do a rant. I don't do rants. You think I'm Dennis Miller or Lewis Black or Alex Jones? I'm just gonna go ape shit for your amusement? I what is with you, man? Come on. I'm just no. All right, tell you what. If I was going to play your sick little game, then what I would probably rant about are the psychics that piss me off, the psychics that I and you and Randy and Psychop and others have been fighting for against for decades. They're from the the storefront psychics to the TV shows, mediums, all these people that are promoted by Oprah, by everybody else, and they don't do what they claim. That's the problem that I have. If you can do it, then do it. If you actually have the powers you claim, then do it, right? Solve the mysteries, find missing persons, predict the future, do these things if you can really do it. They're treated like celebrities. They're promoted on TV. They sell out, venues and seminars, and you can sign up for their things. They're everywhere. You want me to name names? Is that what you want? Okay, fine. I'll name names. Alison Dubois, John Edward, Teresa Caputo, the Long Island medium, Tyler Henry, Thomas John, many, many others. And don't get me started about Sylvia Browne and her decades of felony crimes and bullshit, because that's a whole other thing. But the point here is that if psychics were real, if psychics could actually do what they claim, the world would be a very different place. We wouldn't need TSA security at airports, right? Because the reason that airport security is there is because they don't know who's a terrorist, who's not, who's going to commit a crime, who won't. Well, if psychics were real, they could be sitting there and let everybody else go through. We don't need to go through security. They would know who has weapons. They would know who's going to try and bring down a plane. They would know that if these things were real. Or, for example, public health, which I got my master's degree in, right? The reason that we have to have new vaccines every year for flu and COVID and things like that is that epidemiologists and doctors don't know what the dominant variant is going to be because evolution is real and viruses mutate. So what worked last year may not work this year. And scientists do the best they can, but if they knew precisely what variants were going to be dominant, they could tailor the vaccine just to that and make it more effective and save lives. Why aren't psychics doing that? Where are they? Why aren't they working to tell epidemiologists this is the strain that's going to be most dominant, this is most deadly? Do this, you're going to make the vaccine far more effective and save lives. Another example that recently was Paul McCartney's guitar. It was recovered a couple months ago. Paul McCartney had a guitar stolen 50 years ago, and it was recently recovered in an attic, I think, in London somewhere. And my question is, well, hold on here. For a half a century, this famous guitar was missing, and there were rewards for it and people looking for it. Where were the psychics? Where were they? Right? You have literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world who claim to have psychic powers. They claim to predict the future. They claim to know things that the rest of us don't. They claim to find missing persons. Where were they? Why didn't a single one of them say, "Hey, oh, Mr. McCartney, you're looking for your guitar? It's right here. I use my psychic visions. You'll find it there. I'd like to reward now. And by the way, I've proven to the world that my powers are real. You're welcome." Where are they? Crickets. Or the one that really pisses me off is all the missing persons. Right? You have these cases over the years, and I've written about this. Joe Nichols written about this. Other people have as well, where you have abducted people, often girls. In the case, for example, Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Dugard, Amanda Berry, and others who were abducted as children and held captive in some cases for years, even decades, being abused, beaten, raped, and otherwise harmed, and yet the psychics are nowhere to be found. Hey, Sylvia Brown. Hey, Thomas John, Teresa Caputo, John Edward. Where were you? Were you too busy doing your tours? You too busy selling books? Too busy doing your little $500 ticket dinners to actually make an effort to save these girls' lives, to actually help them out, to do good in the world? Were you too busy with that bullshit? Is that what's going on here? Because I don't understand what's going on. Either you can do this or you can't. Forget all the claims, forget all the other stuff. If you can do this, then do it. If you can save lives, then do it. If you can find missing people, then do it. But they can't. They can't. And really, this is all the more problematic because it's almost certainly happening right now, like literally right now. Statistically, it's almost certain that somewhere in the world, there is some, or probably several, people who are being abducted and being held captive in somebody's basement or apartment or somewhere. And we're not going to know about it. Maybe in next month or next year or in 10 years, there will be some news story. It'll be this horrific story about this captivity that's happening right now as I'm speaking, as you're listening to this. So the question is, hey, psychics, why aren't you rescuing them? Why aren't you out there helping missing persons? Why aren't you doing what you claim to be able to do? Are you too busy counting your money? You too busy reading palms on the boardwalk? Come on, man. If you can do it, then do it. If you can't, then shut the fuck up. Actually, Jay, I don't need this. I shouldn't have agreed to do this. Break. I'm done. I'm just done.
Thanks, Ben. That was fun. I hope one day you come back to skepticism. Our next ranter is Dr. Rachael Dunlop from, she's originally from Australia. I hate those Australian skeptics because they always make the rest of us look bad. They're always on top of things and she's a brilliant scientist and a great skeptic. And she's spoken for us at Skeptical before, and I couldn't do this without asking her to do one of these. So take it away, Dr. Rachie.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rachie, and I'm a medical researcher currently focused on developing diagnostic tests for neurodegenerative diseases. And as a science-based skeptic, like many of us in this room, we need access to good quality research. But if you've ever tried to access scientific publications, you'll know it's not that easy. The current model of scientific publishing is nothing short of absurd. Scientists spend countless hours conducting research, writing papers and reviewing their peers' work, only to hand over the fruits of their labour to big publishing for free. It's a system that not only exploits the very people who advance our knowledge, but also prioritises profit over the dissemination of information. So let's start with the process itself. Researchers meticulously record their work, often spending years on a single study. They write up their findings in detailed scientific papers, which are then submitted to journals. So what happens next? Well, first, they are required to sign away the copyright to these big publishers. This means that even though the research is essentially theirs, the paper no longer belongs to them. It's kind of like an artist creating a masterpiece and then being forced to relinquish all rights to that to a gallery with no compensation. Secondly, scientists sometimes pay these publishers up to $3,000 to publish their work, which they funded and they gave the journal for free. Crazy, right? But the exploitation doesn't stop there. Let me tell you about the peer review process. This is a critical step in ensuring the quality and credibility of scientific research, but it relies entirely on the goodwill of other scientists. Scientists volunteer their time and expertise to review manuscripts, providing detailed feedback to improve the quality of these papers. And how are they compensated for their efforts? Well, they're not. It's unpaid, thankless job that is essential for maintaining scientific standards. So let's recap. Scientists give away their research, sign away their rights, pay to get it published, and then provide free labour to review other people's work. And who profits from this? The big publishing houses. The publishing houses then sell access to these papers at exorbitant prices, raking in massive profits, while the scientists who did all the work see none of it. And then universities and institutions pay hefty subscription fees to access this research. And individual articles can cost upwards of $30 or $40 to download and read. So the public, who often funded this research through their taxes, are shut out unless they can afford these steep prices. So this system creates a vicious cycle. Scientists need to publish in prestigious journals to advance their careers, secure funding, and gain recognition. It's a monopolistic practice that stifles the free exchange of ideas and impedes scientific progress. Open access journals have emerged as a potential solution, but even they come with their own set of challenges. Many of these charge high publication fees, shifting the financial burden onto researchers and their institutions. And while this model improves accessibility, it still highlights the underlying issue, which is the commodification of knowledge. So, the bottom line is that the current scientific publishing model is deeply flawed. It exploits scientists, it restricts access to knowledge, it prioritises profit over progress. So I reckon it's time for a revolution on how we disseminate scientific information. We need a system that values the contributions of researchers, makes knowledge accessible to all, and ensures that the fruits of scientific labour benefit society as a whole, not just the bottom line of big publishers. And this is so important during this time in history, when alternative facts and misinformation are rife. And as scientists, as the bearers of facts and evidence, we should be making as much information as possible available as widely as possible. Now back to the bench for science.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Rachael. Our next ranter is the simply irresistible Robert Palmer, not the singer, the well-known skeptic. So he was one of the first people I asked to do this. I thought he would have something interesting to say, and it turns out one of his pet peeves is one of my pet peeves. Take it away, Rob.
Greetings, Skeptical attendees. I'm Rob Palmer, and since 2018, I've been writing for the Skeptical Inquirer as the well-known skeptic. Occasionally, I also have articles published in other skeptical media, and one of those is the science section of the website AIPT Comics. The goal of that site is to introduce science and skepticism to people who normally wouldn't seek out such articles, but who've come to that site due to their interest in sci-fi and other pop culture. Articles published in the science section are typically infused with those elements to keep them interesting. Why am I telling you this? Well, I'm about to read to you one such article. I wrote this for AIPT about one of my pet peeves, which is when scientists and skeptics proclaim with confidence that, although they don't believe UFOs are extraterrestrial spaceships, that extraterrestrial civilizations are probable or likely, and perhaps even abundant. That opinion is very, very common. So here's my pushback on that claim as published in AIPT Science in 2022 and punched up here with some hopefully interesting visuals. The article is titled, "How Likely is the Evolution of Advanced Aliens Really?" Enjoy.
Extraterrestrial civilizations exist. In fiction, anyway. It seems that every planet visited by a starship of the United Federation of Planets has one. In fact, the UFP's mission statement is to seek out new life and new civilizations. Most every planet in that galaxy of long ago and far, far away is home to at least one native intelligent species. Many DC heroes and villains are extraterrestrials. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is so full of civilizations competing for limited resources that Thanos believed it was his duty to rectify the overpopulation. Fiction generally reflects the popular beliefs of the time in which it's written. In ancient civilizations like Greece, Rome, and in Scandinavia, the superheroes and villains weren't from other planets. They were immortal gods, fundamentally distinct from the natural world inhabited by humans. Earth was the only place with mortal beings. Thoughts of extrasolar planets and extraterrestrials just wasn't in the public consciousness. But as time marched on, thanks to science, our understanding of the universe and our place in it was totally transformed. We learned that Earth is not the center of the solar system, nor is the solar system at the center of our galaxy. Then we discovered that our galaxy is not the entire universe, but just one of 200 billion or more galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. And most recently, beginning in 1992, we learned that not only do some stars have planets, but that most all stars have them. As of January 1, 2022, when I wrote this article, the verified count of known exoplanets stood at 4,905. Bringing that up to date to today, the 27th of June, 2024, we now have confirmed 5,678 exoplanets. If we consider just the Earth-sized ones and extrapolate that number, which were discovered in just the small portion of a galaxy searched to date, to the volume of the entire Milky Way, the math suggests there are likely over 40 billion Earth-sized exoplanets in our galaxy alone, to say nothing of other types of planets and moons. Is it any wonder that when people contemplate these facts, for the most part, their assumption is that we just can't be alone? To quote Dr. Ellie Arroway from the film adaptation of Carl Sagan and Anne Dryan's book Contact, "I'll tell you one thing about the universe, though. The universe is a pretty big place. It's bigger than anything anyone has ever dreamed of before. So if it's just us, seems like an awful waste of space." But does the scientific evidence actually support this point of view? Is it necessarily true that because of the huge number of planets in existence, civilizations are likely to have arisen elsewhere? The unstated assumption is that humanity emerging on Earth was itself likely, or even a sure thing. What if the odds of humanity emerging and surviving on Earth were actually low, and maybe even infinitesimally small? What if we're just very, very, very lucky to be here? If we owe our existence to a fortunate and extremely rare set of circumstances, then no matter how many exoplanets there are, all bets are off on hordes of ETs existing outside of fiction. How can we determine which it is? In the latter part of the 20th century, astronomer Carl Sagan and others argued that the characteristics of the Earth, such as the composition of the planet itself and the conditions in our solar system and galaxy, were likely typical for a great number of planets, no matter where they were. From the principle of mediocrity, they concluded that the evolution of life on Earth resulting in intelligent beings was also likely typical. Therefore, the line of reasoning goes, the universe is probably full of complex life, presumably including other beings with technology. However, more recently, some scientists analyzing the topic have argued that perhaps the opposite is true. They suggest that some unusual characteristics of the Earth and its environs were instrumental to the development of life, and this set of conditions may not be typical for other planets. In fact, they argue that Earth's set of advantageous circumstances may be extremely rare. These perhaps necessary conditions to produce life may include any or all of the following: a favorable location in its galaxy, not too close to the dangerous galactic core and other stars; a favorable and stable orbital distance from a certain type of star; a favorable arrangement of orbits of the other planets in the system; being a terrestrial planet of a certain size; having plate tectonics; having an atmosphere, one favorable to life, of course. On top of all this, assuming that a planet has sufficient favorable conditions to allow abiogenesis to occur, there is still a long way to go to produce intelligent, technology-capable life forms. Let's take a look at the only example of success in this regard that we know of: humans on Earth. Numerous evolutionary steps led to our species, including all of these. Self-replicating molecules formed and thrived. Simple, prokaryotic single-cell life emerged and thrived, followed by complex, eukaryotic, single-cell life. Sexual reproduction developed. Multicellular life arose, creating even more diverse and complex life forms. The long chain of events resulted in over 5 billion species developing on our planet, all of which had to constantly struggle for survival against the elements and their competition. Of all the species that there ever were, 99% are now extinct, including many other hominids such as our cousins, Australopithecus africanus, Homo habilis, and Neanderthals. The sequence of species that led to us was no sure thing. Life took 1 billion years or so to get started on our 4.5 billion-year-old planet. It took another 3 billion for something as complex as worms to evolve in the sea, and that wasn't a certainty. The evolution of Earth's life was influenced by gradual changes to its environment, as well as by a number of cataclysmic events. One line of evidence points to a human population bottleneck occurring about 70,000 years ago, caused by a supervolcano, reducing our species down to a precariously low number, perhaps just 10,000 individuals. That's how close it might have come to there being no humans on Earth. In fact, the planet's history is punctuated by catastrophic events, which most species did not survive. Around 650 million years ago, the Earth likely froze over, like in Snowpiercer, but without the train. We have documented many more global extinctions, including at 517, 502, and 488 million years ago. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event of 66 million years ago not only killed all non-avian dinosaurs, but over 75% of all animal species on Earth. A slight change to any of these catastrophes, or the addition or subtraction of such events, would have resulted in a very different biosphere on our planet now. Collectively, the impediments to life and civilization emerging on a planet are referred to as great filters. If time were rerun and events on Earth were started over from the beginning, and anything significant was changed, would Homo sapiens still emerge? Would life have happened at all? This scenario was explored in the series finale of Star Trek: The Next Generation, All Good Things. The omnipotent being Q brought Picard back in time to the primordial Earth at the exact moment life had originally started. Picard bears witness to a new timeline in which a puddle of slime, about to spawn the first life on Earth, is interfered with and fails to do so. Thus, humanity will never exist. Since our lineage survived all the great filters of the past, it may seem that humans are home free. But it's not certain that we're out of the woods. There may be great filters in our future, and any other civilization elsewhere in the universe will have to overcome these also. To mention just a few, we must survive a looming climate crisis, prepare for possible pandemics even worse than COVID-19, and proactively thwart any death from the sky global extinction events. So enjoy those tales of close encounters and galactic empires. They may contain the only aliens that human beings will ever encounter.
So that is the end of my article, but I want to give the last word on this subject to Professor Brian Cox.
One of the problems we face as a civilization is we don't know how valuable we are. In our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are 400 billion stars and countless trillions of planets. And yet, it is possible that you could count the number of civilizations on the fingers of one hand. In fact, it's possible that there is only one, and that's us, here.
Thanks, Rob. Our next ranter is one of my favorite local skeptics. So this is Carolyn Dougherty, who I met a few years ago, again working on Skeptical. Fantastic skeptic, runs Rational Roundtable. This year went way out of her comfort zone to do some stuff for us. We need more people like Carolyn in the skeptical community. Take it away, Carolyn.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Dougherty, founder of Rational Roundtable, a subgroup of the Stockton area atheists and freethinkers. My fellow skeptics, we need to talk. And what I mean by that is we need to get out there and talk to other people. Many of us complain about the lack of critical thinking that we encounter every single day. But then we go on and we say things like, I'm not going to bother talking to that person because I'll never be able to reach them. And that's true. If we don't bother, nothing's going to change. Luckily, there are strategies that have been shown to be effective and help encourage critical thinking in others and even changing some minds. You can find examples of these in Escaping the Rabbit Hole by Mick West, How to Talk to a Science Denier by Lee McIntyre, How Minds Change by David McRaney. And there's great websites. Thinking is Power, the News Literacy Project, Generation Skeptics. All of them have teaching materials for educators as well. Of course, we can't change everyone's mind. But if more of us engage in conversations using these strategies, more minds can be changed. And it'll help make the world just a little bit more rational. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for listening.
Next up, we have Mick West from the Sacramento area. It's hard for me to believe that we have such great skeptical talent, so local. A couple of years ago, when all the UFO stuff was coming out, I couldn't turn on the TV without seeing Mick West. And I've spent a bunch of time talking to Mick. He's spoken for us at Skeptical before a number of times. His book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, if you haven't read it, is fantastic. And I've used that to help some friends of mine who went down a rabbit hole on conspiracy theories. This is a very different talk, and I'd expect nothing less from Mick West. Take it away, Mick.
Hi, I'm Mick West. I'm the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic and Respect. I investigate conspiracy theories, and I also investigate UFOs. Now, one thing that really makes my head literally explode is when people use words incorrectly. Language is very important. Communication is very important. And if you want to know what a word means, you can look it up in a dictionary. But when you do that, when you do look up a word in a dictionary, you'll discover some interesting things, especially if you use a dictionary like the Oxford English Dictionary, a dictionary of English usage. Usage changes over time. Words mean things now that they used to not mean. Word sometimes means things that is contradictory to what you might expect the meaning of the word to actually be. For example, the word literally now has a secondary meaning, which means figuratively. So when you say things like, this literally makes my head explode, it doesn't mean it literally makes your head explode. It's a figure of speech. And using literally is simply an intensifier. This makes some people angry, but it's the way people use words. And if people use words in a certain way, that is what those words mean. They might not mean that for you, but the thing we're talking about here is communication, especially in the realm of science communication. In science, communicators value precision. We need to know what we're talking about. But what's really important is communicating effectively. For example, take the word chemicals. A lot of people will use the word chemicals to mean something bad, something artificial, like this food has chemicals in it. Now, of course, as scientists and science communicators and skeptics, we know that the word chemicals includes everything. Everything is made of chemicals. Water is a chemical. So we might be tempted to correct the person and say, oh, well, everything's a chemical. But that kind of misses the point. This person is using the word chemicals in a specific way, one which may well be in the dictionary, which is something artificial, something that is man-made, something that is potentially harmful. They're using it in a very specific way, and you really need to understand that when you're talking to them. If you simply correct them and say everything is a chemical, that's just going to confuse them, or it might even make them angry. You might make them feel like you are talking down to them. So the best thing to do there is to acknowledge the difference. You could say something like, yes, it is bad that we have all these additives in food, but they're not all bad. These things are actually found in nature, some of these things. And by the way, the word chemical in science is used to refer to everything. So just because something's a chemical doesn't mean it's bad. You don't have to start out saying this is wrong. Another perhaps more common thing in the skeptical community is the word theory. Now, whenever the word theory comes up, and say, I've got a theory about that, people will say, well, that's actually not what theory means. A theory is a well-tested model in science, something that fits observation, like the theory of gravity, the theory of universal gravitation, or the theory of electromagnetic forces. These are all things that are very, very well defined, they're very well tested, and we understand what they are. So when someone says that's just a theory, or it's science has all these theories, but we don't really know if they're true or not. Yes, sure. You could say you can explain to them what theory means in science, but you don't need to labor the point. You don't need to be talking down to people and telling them that they're using words incorrectly when they're actually using a word correctly. Because the word theory, if you look it up in the dictionary, means a hypothesis. It's not the usage that we use in science. And that's a very important distinction. Just like with chemicals, we have one set of language that is used in science, but then the public has a completely different usage of those words. We are talking to the public. We're not talking to other scientists. So when you're talking to the public, you need to use the language that the public understands, and you need to accept that they are going to use the language in a certain way that you may disagree with and you may find personally disagreeable. It may literally make your head explode, but you don't need to make that be a sticking point in the conversation. This is something that I see over and over again online in people who think of themselves as science communicators. They spend all this time worrying about whether someone's using the word theory correctly, when really they should be just talking to the person about what the actual topic is. And then there's other words where the meaning is in dispute, like the words sex and gender. Words that are sometimes used interchangeably. Sometimes they focus on one or they focus on the other, and sometimes the meaning gets confused because people are using it for essentially political ends. They're trying to create division by focusing on certain topics. So there, you have to be careful. You have to tread lightly. The important thing in communication is that you get your point across and that you understand what the other person is talking about. And to do that, you need to know how they are using the words, which might not necessarily be the exact same way that words are used in the dictionary. So in summary, science communication is about communication. Precision is important to science, but if you're not communicating, if you're just arguing over the meaning of words, then you might as well be just precisely talking to yourself. Embrace the vernacular and communicate.
Thanks, Mick. Next up, we have Richard Saunders, one of my favorite Aussie skeptics. And I've already told you, those Aussies always make us look bad. I mean, a few years ago, Richard did the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project. If you're unfamiliar with that, you should look it up. He analyzed psychic predictions over decades, and it's one of those great evergreen projects that that we'll be using for years and years to dispel crazy claims about psychics. In addition, of course, he's been doing the Skeptic Zone since the dawn of time, one of the longest running science and skepticism-based podcasts. And he always is so generous to Skeptical. Take it away, Richard.
Hello, this is Richard Saunders from Sydney, Australia, and the Skeptic Zone podcast. Now, I've been asked to do a rant, to whine, to whinge, as we say, about some skeptical topic. What gets my skeptical goat? What really annoys me in skepticism? And that's a really tough question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that. Like everybody else, I get annoyed from day to day about various things, this, that, or the other. Don't we all? But in skepticism, it's hard to know, because there are so many things that skeptics have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and you think, well, at what stage does that become something that annoys you within skepticism? So I'm not really sure how to answer the question. I can say, though, what I do find frustrating over the years and the decades now is having to explain the same basic concepts again and again and again to the media. The media might come and say, somebody's seen a UFO. Now, after decades of saying to the reporter or whatever, well, there's no real good evidence for UFOs and all the movies so far have not been conclusive, it gets frustrating to say the same thing again. But then we have to bear in mind that people have short memories, and new generations are growing up, and new reporters are growing up, and maybe they haven't covered these stories before, or maybe they haven't researched to see how many times the same similar story has come up. And we also must remember the fact that news outlets need stories. And if the story is that somebody saw a ghost or a UFO, or there's a mystery, or this psychic maybe had a premonition or saw something, then that's the story they will run with. And I've seen this again and again. So it's no good us debunking something and then thinking, great, we've done that. That topic's now dead. We've uncovered the mystery. That's the end of it. That very rarely happens, because, as I say, the media have short memories. I could be cynical and say they don't really care about the truth as long as there's a good story. And, to some respect, that does happen. I know that there are certain producers and reporters who, it's just a good story. It's like saying, I know I've done something bad, but it's nothing personal. It's not against you. It's just, that's what we have to do. So I guess we have to bear that in mind. So that does frustrate me and annoy me at times with skepticism. The other thing that annoys me are people who won't, for example, take up our challenge. They think they're psychic, or they pretend to be psychic, or who cares what. It doesn't matter. And they'll say, well, we're not going to take the Skeptics challenge because the skeptics are liars, cheaters, and they're closed-minded anyway. It won't work. And that can be very frustrating too, because it's hard to know where to go from there. If the media are interested at all, after that, they're probably not interested. Or they seem to be having a rant about the media. They'll have a story, and this happened to me only last year, I think, a story of a so-called psychic doing something, and it's a hot story for the moment. And they'll ring me up and say, please appear on our show. We want to hear your point of view. This guy says he's psychic, but we want to hear what the skeptics have to say. Well, it's only to flesh out the story. They don't really care if the psychic is real or cheating, or it doesn't matter. and they don't really care what I have to say. They just need me on the screen or a skeptic just to pretend to have some sort of balance. Or they'll try to butter you up. They'll say, you come on and we can really tell the world the skeptical point of view. They don't care about the skeptical point of view. Again, it just makes for a better story if they have two sides. Well, if there are two sides, usually, well, that's debatable. But again, we get back to the point of thinking, well, that's the job. That's, a lot of the people in the media, that's their job. Now, I'm not one of these people who run around saying the mainstream media are full of conspiracies and they lie all the time. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of dedicated, hardworking people in the mainstream media, the commercial media. But there is an element of not caring. There is an element of, we have to produce a story. This is what we do. Next week, it'll be another story. We won't worry about anything we've said before. Let's press on. Next story. We've only got a day to do a story. Quick, film something. So, yeah, that can be frustrating. But it doesn't mean we give up. But it just means that we're prepared and we're not unduly surprised when these things happen. It's the nature of the beast. Well, that's my 5-6 minute skeptical rant from Sydney, Australia. This is Richard Saunders signing off from the Skeptics' own studios, or part of them, for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. That was fantastic. Next up, we have Katie Dyer. And I based these rational rants on the Sunday morning papers that Ray Hall used to do at TAM and then at SciCon. And it's one of my favorite parts of the national conventions, where you get skeptics standing up for 15 minutes talking about something they're passionate about. And I had a chance to do that once. It was a highlight for me at the last amazing meeting. I'll never, ever forget that. And Ray and his partner Katie are staples in that. They always knock it out of the park. And so I asked Katie to do one of these, and Katie always has these remarkable insights into the way we learn and the way skeptics process information. And she had a hard time keeping it under 10 minutes, but it's a fantastic rant. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Professor Dyer here, talking about false beliefs about children and families. There's evidence from many academic disciplines that when students come into a college classroom with false beliefs, incorrect beliefs about the subject matter of the class, that makes it hard for them to learn the truth. The false beliefs, especially when they go unchallenged by the instructor, kind of serve as a gatekeeper, only letting information pass if it seems to confirm the false belief, and just essentially putting up a barrier to anything new and different. Obviously, this is a problem. I teach in a department of human development and family science. So we teach classes about child development and about family relationships. They're very important topics. Some of my colleagues and I, shown here, have been investigating what are the false beliefs that students come into our department with, they come into our classes with. The hope is that if we can identify the common false beliefs, we can do a better job addressing them, and in the end, our students will learn more. So today, I want to share with you the top 5 false beliefs about children and families that I see among my students at Fresno State. Okay. Number 5, believed by 68% of incoming students, strangers tamper with Halloween candy. If you were like me, you were raised by parents who had to go through your candy bag before you could eat anything. They looked for things like razor blades and apples and in packaged candy, things that were homemade. Rice Krispie treats were pretty dangerous, and we were never really allowed to eat them because there was this belief that it was a huge risk that people were tampering with Halloween candy all the time. Today, my students still believe this is true, although they tell me that lately the the lore is that candy has been laced with fentanyl. So now instead of razor blades, it's dangerous drugs are being are tainting the Halloween candy. It just turns out there's never been a single documented case of this kind of candy tampering by a stranger. There have been a couple of stories that have really cemented these fears in the public's mind. There was a parent who killed his own child tragically. He believed that there was lots of candy tampering going on, so he could hide what he did that way. So he tampered with candy and gave it to all his kids' friends on the mistaken belief that the police would assume that some other wacko out there had interfered with all of their candy, and his kid was the only kid unlucky enough to die from it, but nobody fell for it, and he's in prison now. Similarly, there was a child who died from consuming illicit drugs that he found in his parents' home. They knew they were going to get in trouble for making that substance available to him, and so they tried to cover up by saying it must have been in the Halloween candy. So these stories really cemented this idea in the public's mind. Kids do sometimes insert sewing needles and these kinds of things into candy as a prank, but to date, every case that has been discovered is this kind of prank without the intention of truly harming kids, and no kids have actually been harmed. This is basically an urban legend. It's not true. Okay, next. 78% of my students believe that sugar makes kids hyper. If you work with kids, if you have kids, if you were ever a kid, this makes sense. On days when kids have access to lots of sugar, so maybe Halloween, maybe someone's birthday party, other holidays where kids have access to lots of sweets, they tend to be kind of ramped up. And that's true. I can see why people believe this. It's the causal relationship that just isn't true, that it's the sugar that's making kids hyper. This has been tested quite a lot, and sometimes with randomized controlled trials. And what we find is that when the child and the parent and everyone looking at the situation is blind to whether the child had sugar or some kind of artificial sweetener, they can't tell a difference. There is no measurable change in the behavior of kids when they've consumed even a lot of sugar. Some people say, well, maybe it's not true for all kids, but my kid is really sugar sensitive, so maybe it's only sugar sensitive kids that this happens to. It's an interesting hypothesis, has been tested on children identified by their parents as especially sugar sensitive, and the results are the same. The truth is that sugar does not change kids' behavior. All of this is in parental perception, and once we believe something to be true, confirmation bias sets in, and we see examples of it being true all the time, and kind of ignore examples where it's not true. But this one is just false. Okay, number 3, frequent praise raises kids' self-esteem. I'm sure you've heard this, that we're supposed to be all the time telling kids we love how amazing they are, how wonderful they are, how beautiful and handsome they are, and how smart they are. And we're supposed to be giving them all kinds of messages that would build them up. And the idea is that if we build them up in terms of their self-esteem, then they will have the courage to try things that maybe they aren't so good at, but they'll have more experience, they'll be go-getters, and they'll be confident, and that confidence will bring them success in life. It turns out none of this scenario is true. This is called the self-esteem movement, and the whole thing has been debunked. It is true that sometimes kids who are performing at a higher level seem to have a higher self-esteem. They're confident and they are aware of their skills. And sometimes that's true, although sometimes that is not true at all. But it would be reasonable then for someone to say, well, maybe if they had the confidence, that would produce the success. But the truth is that it's the success that produces the confidence. It just kind of goes in the opposite way. High performance comes first, self-esteem follows. What if we embarked on this strategy where we tell them how amazing and wonderful and smart and everything they are all the time? Would that make them feel better about themselves? It turns out not really, because children are very perceptive and they notice when our praise is inauthentic, when it is much more dramatic than their performance would warrant, for instance, or when we don't really believe it, we're just saying the thing that we have been told we're supposed to say. Kids recognize the inauthenticity and they kind of take on the message, the overall message, which is, I'm not that great and my parent feels sorry for me, and that's why they're being kind of manipulative this way, offering me inauthentic praise. Now, they can't articulate it that way, but that seems to be what's happening. They also find non-specific praise to be manipulative. So when we say, you did a great job, it's not specific. What did I do that was great? What was the part of that you're noticing? It doesn't mean anything when we say it, and they know it, and it doesn't mean anything when they hear it. There's a lot I could say about this, one of my favorite topics, but I'm going to try to keep this short. So I'll just say as a teaser, what should we be doing for kids, if not heaping piles of praise on them to help them be successful? Well, what we know is that children use feedback. They use feedback. It has to be authentic. It has to be true. It has to be specific. So if we noticed that they were balancing the bike pretty effectively when they first got on it, even though they were a little scared, and we say, I noticed that you balanced on the bike when you first got on it, even though you were scared, that's very specific. And that kind of feedback helps them. I will say that kind of specific feedback helps when it's positive, that you did something that worked, and that kind of specific feedback even helps when it's negative. But I noticed that you kept looking at the ground instead of looking where you were headed. That might be why you lost your balance in the end. See, that would be maybe sort of criticism, because it's very specific, but it's not, you're great, it's here's a problem, but specific feedback is helpful. The second thing about feedback is that it should be non-evaluative. We really don't need to be telling them how fabulous or how terrible they are. We need to be describing the behaviors to help them zero in on the task itself, to understand the task, and our evaluations of whether they are morally good or bad because of what they're doing, that just isn't helpful. Okay, number 2, most people have a learning style. About 80% of my students believe this, but surveys of elementary school teachers suggest that like 95% of them believe this, and they try to tailor their instruction based on the learning styles of the kids in their classes. Try to make material available in a wide variety of modalities and so on and so forth. It's just, it sounds great. The problem is that it's just not true. Most people do not have a learning style. How people learn is when the modality is matched to the content that they're being taught. There are certain kinds of content that's better taught visually, other kinds of content better taught kinesthetically. So there are some differences that way, but it's not based on the learner's style. It's based on the match between the content and the teaching or the instruction. In truth, the vast majority of people can't be classified as having a learning style. Most of us learn in multiple different modalities depending on what it is we're learning. Very few people, in fact, it looks like maybe 5% could in some way be classified as having a clear preference. That's not a big number. And even among those people, if they are taught, if they're offered information in their preferred style, they don't learn it any better than if it is presented to them in a different modality. So learning styles, they're just not real. They don't exist. Top most frequently believed false statement is that men and women have different communication styles. This is the idea that men and women simply, well, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? They have different ways of, they have a different language, they have a different way of thinking about the world, and this is why they have difficulty communicating. So if you have problems that arise in a romantic relationship, it's probably just because you're communicating about it differently. This is pretty tempting because many of us have encountered communication difficulties, and it's nice to have an easy explanation for it. The problem is it's incorrect. It's not true that men and women have predictably different communication styles. The truth is there's more variation between people of the same gender than there are between men and women as groups. Yeah, communicating in intimate relationships can be challenging, and there are some problems that pop up predictably, but they're not about gender. I will leave you with something to explore if you want to know more about communication in intimate relationships that is not pseudoscientific. John Gottman's work is evidence-based, and he provides lots of good information about communication in intimate relationships. The title of the book is a little outdated. These things work regardless of marriage, marital status or not. They're generally true, but that's a great book and one you might consider. Well, thanks for going on this little tour with me of things that people commonly falsely believe about children and families. It might start to feel like everything you think you know is wrong, and I'm sorry about that. I don't want people to leave with no sense of their own knowledge, but it's okay if you're a little shaken, because recognizing that our common sense and our personal experiences can sometimes lead us to the wrong conclusions about important topics, that is the first step to learning something new. Thanks.
Next up, we have something a little different. So David Almandsmith is one of those guys that I've known for years. He's on the board with me on Bay Area Skeptics, and David always has something surprising to say. He has a past where every time I meet him, I learn something new. Maybe he's a motorcycle racer, or he's spent time in the Peace Corps, or it's just never fails to amaze me. And he's always got a really fascinating opinion on skeptical topics. And this one did not disappoint. I hope you enjoy it.
You've noticed. You've grumped. They hog parking spaces and look threatening in your rearview mirror at intersections. I'm talking about those monster-sized pickup trucks. Well, pickups are great if you live on a farm, but the ones I'm talking about are all shiny, and they've got leather seats and Bose speakers and a built-in K-cup coffee brewer. And you know, that truck's never encountered a hay bale, a muddy road, or a cow pie. Hell, those trucks' beds aren't long enough to lie down in unless you're my sister, who's 5 foot. I used to think people bought them because they needed to haul stuff around, other than the kids and the dog. But generally that isn't so. Here are 3 quotes from suburban pickup truck owners. Number 1, there's no country song about a Camry. 2, yeah, I've got 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. I have no idea how to use it, but I got it. 3, it's not about what you need. It's about what you like, what you're going to keep happy, what you deserve. Let me add to that, until I get my 40 acres, this here truck is going to keep me happy. So what if you only get 18 miles per gallon? It's got testosterone written all over it, and you're telling the world, I don't give a rat's ass what I spend on gas. I got a big truck that goes with my big, well, you know what. By the way, our government excludes pickups and SUVs from the $2,000 gas guzzler tax since they are classified as commercial trucks. Yeah, right. A Dodge pickup in 1980 weighed 2,500 pounds with an 8-foot bed option, and most had a single front bench seat. Today, the Dodge pickup is almost twice as heavy at 4,800 pounds with a 5-foot bed, and all of them are 5-passenger. Also, pickups are higher, especially the front hood, and when that hits a person, it's often fatal. A list was made of the 16 vehicles that kill the most pedestrians, and half of those are pickup trucks. Another 4 of the 16 are full-size SUVs. Are pickup trucks contributing to climate change? Well, not if you don't believe in that crap.
Thanks, Dave. I knew you were going to give us something very different. We're going to close this out with a great rant by Genie Scott, who took this to heart and decided to talk about something I think is perfect to close the conference with. And Genie is the president of Bay Area Skeptics, someone I get to work with closely. It's a huge privilege for me. But Genie is also a super surprising person. Not many people know she used to ride a motorcycle. She's been to the Playboy Mansion multiple times. You should ask her about that. She's an interesting person for all the right reasons, in all kinds of ways you just never expect. But again, one of my favorite skeptics in the world. Take it away, Genie.
Hello, I'm Genie Scott. I'm president of Bay Area Skeptics. I started out my professional career as a college professor and then moved to directing the National Center for Science Education. And both as a college professor and as director of NCSE, I've always been very concerned with the public understanding of science. And my rant for Skeptical has to do with my annoyance at people really overreacting to headlines like this. It seems like you can hardly pick up a paper or read a blog post or listen to a podcast or even go to a skeptics conference without hearing gloom and doom about how Americans are anti-science. And my point in this rant is going to be that, yeah, there is some concern about a sliding support for science, but it's not nearly as dire as I think a lot of people think there is. So let me make that argument to you. You see if you agree. First of all, one way of looking at public understanding or acceptance of science is attitudes towards scientists themselves. And there have been the Harris Foundation, or the Harris Poll, has conducted almost annual assessments of the most prestigious occupations among Americans. And scientists are right up there at the top. In fact, doctors are at the very top, and scientists, firefighters, and military officers are pretty much in a tie. These are data from 2017, but things really haven't changed, and they are the same from one survey to another. The military and scientists and doctors come up right at the top. Now, this is a close-up. I want you to look at the dark blue is scientists. I have confidence in scientists acting in the best interest of the public a great deal. Lighter blue is a fair amount. Not too much is the kind of sickly green color there. And again, military and scientists are right at the top. Now, if you look at these data over time, the military, medical scientists and scientists, yeah, there seems to have been something of a diminishment of support for occupations across the board. Military's down, medical scientists and scientists are all down, but it's all still pretty doggone high. You're in the 70s, and it's hard to imagine Americans agreeing about anything 70% of the time. And just so you know, this is really high. Here are some other occupations: journalists, business leaders, and elected officials, and they're mostly in the tank. They're all, the vast percentages there are in that sickly green part. Another way of looking at American supports for scientists is trust in professions. And once again, these data from 2023 in the Gallup Association, and they have a slightly different way of doing things, but still, the dark blue is very high prestige, the green is high, yellow is average, purple is low, and red is very low. Well, again, nurses and medical doctors and pharmacists show up at the very top. They didn't ask about the military, but again, we come out on top. This is a pretty good thing. So science in general, American support, that's good. What about the other way around. Scientists in general, as a profession and as individuals, have a pretty good press. We're appreciated by the general public. What about going to scientists for advice? Well, yes, once again, if you want to have information about the MMR vaccine and about climate change and about GMO foods, who do you go to? You don't go to elected officials. You go to scientists. And here again, these data, I think, support the idea of Americans like scientists. Americans also like science per se. These data from 2024 article by John Miller and his colleagues are looking at the people who actually are interested in science. And if you look at the data, the first line is 1956. The people who consider themselves quite interested in science, that's that blue line, they were a pretty small percentage of people, like low 20s. That's gone up to the almost 60%, high 50s. And similarly for the green line, which is people who self-identify as considering themselves well-informed about science, that's gone up since the 1950s as well. And then the people who sort of say that they're attentive, they're not the highest amount of attention, but even they have gone up since the 50s. So what about the attitude towards science as having or not having a positive effect on society? Here we go back to Pew, and yes, again, the percentage of people believing that science is mostly positive has gone down since 2016, from 2016 to 2023, but still it's mostly positive. And the sort of beige color in there is equal positive and negative, and so I guess we get half of that. But it's not too bad. And I think one of the ways of looking at Americans' attitudes towards science that kind of gets to the root of things is, are they willing to spend money on it? And when you look at figures asking whether you want to give money for scientific research, yes, U.S. adults as a whole are very positive about investing in science over time. Now, investing in society for science. Now, I'm not being a total Pollyanna here. I mean, yeah, I'm a Pollyanna about a whole bunch of stuff, I confess. But there is polarization in the United States, certainly. There's a political polarization. Republicans and those who lean Republican are less think it's less worthwhile to invest in society than do Democrats. But it's still, the U.S. adult line there, the top line there, is still a very healthy 78% of Americans want to invest in science. I've showed you this little statistic before about scientists having a positive effect upon society. Again, this is an example of the polarization in American society, with Republicans and leaning Republicans being less enthusiastic about science than Democrats and lean Democrats, and sort of we kind of already knew about that. But it's still pretty high, and that's kind of one of the take-homes that I want to try to persuade you of. Another way of looking at this is trust in scientific expertise, and this is also from John Miller's data. By the way, if you're interested in this subject, the Bay Area Skeptics had a Skept Talk in June by John Miller. You can find it on the Bay Area Skeptics web YouTube page. You can watch our channel and see this. But I think this kind of illustrates the polarization and where it comes from. These data are from 2016 versus 2020, and it's the trust in scientific expertise. If you look at that moderate line, what's happening is the moderates are getting hollowed out. The moderates are moving to either the low or the high end of the spectrum. But again, it's not all gloom and doom. More moved to the higher end of the spectrum than not. Okay, enough with the charts already. I hope you did not go totally blind looking at my charts. One of the other points that I want to make is if you look at those newspaper articles that I started my little rant off with here, you'll find that most of them in their discussion of what science they're talking about come back to the same three sciences. It's evolution, it's climate change, and vaccines. Those are the ones that people really are excited about. Nobody claims that there's a political division for photosynthesis, right? There's not a political division over hip surgery. We're all happy when grandma gets a new hip and is bowling again. It's evolution, climate change, vaccines. These are the major ones that have some significance for people's values and for opinions that they hold very, very closely. So those are the ones that people get polarized about. And I want to consider this because one of the things that I think people miss when they see headlines like the ones I started off with, and they're clutching their pearls over Americans are anti-science, they're forgetting that there's a lot of nuance in this area of the public understanding of science. And there's a lot of factors that come in. It's not just these people are dumb. That's not it at all. Let me use as an example some Pew data where they're looking at the roads being a science-related issue. In this case, this is climate change. And they've sliced up they've done their crosstabs, as it were. How much is an individual's attitude toward global warming a function of ideology? How much is weighted by age? How much weighted by education or solid scientific knowledge? How does male-female, how does gender affect the attitude toward these sciences? And does race affect it? Does religion or attendance in religious functioning affect this attitude? And what you find, and I'm sure people listening to this are not terribly surprised, with global warming, yes, party has a lot to do with it. Political ideology, Democrats recognize it, Republicans do not. Age is also a factor, with older people being more concerned about, younger people being more concerned about climate change than older ones. But the amount of scientific knowledge you have, the gender and race really are not very heavily weighted in terms of a person's attitude toward global warming. And religion just has very, very weak associations. Now, here's a little quiz for you. Here is another scientific issue. In this one, religion is really important and age is really important. Race, not so much. And party doesn't really weight very high on it either. Have you guessed what we're talking about? Obviously, it's evolution. And other issues like GMOs or pesticide use, access to drug treatment before drugs have been fully tested, and power plant stuff, power plant emissions. These are all over the map. And take a look at that bottom one, access to drug treatments. Here you've got age and race weighting very, very heavily. And there's a reason for that. And it gets into equity of science and so forth. But the point being, you see this chart and you see that there are a lot of different variables that influence people's attitudes about scientific issues. So my take home here and the end of my rant is that I want you to think, when you see one of those headlines about Americans are anti-science, take it with a grain of salt. The survey research we have suggests that it's a much more complicated issue. Generally speaking, Americans support science. They like science. They think it's important. They want their kids to grow up to be scientists and STEM people. But there's a lot of other variables that affect things. Indeed, there is political polarization, but it's much more nuanced than you think. And that is my Skeptical rant.
Thank you, Genie. That was a perfect way to end the conference. And thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the Rational Rants. It's my absolute privilege to ask my favorite skeptics to come out and do these. And they did not disappoint. I really had a ball watching all of these, and I thank all of the people that sent in their rants. Also, this is the last session in the 2024 Skeptical Conference, and just let me thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.